Hello everyone, welcome back to Human Geography. All nations are committed to achieve a higher standard of living for their people. That means with adequate food, good health, literacy, education, and a gainful employment. These are the goals of millions now living in this world. An important barrier to the achievement of this goal is our current population. So, hence, in today's human geography, we will be discussing population as the major factor. In this session, we discuss the major determinants, trends, and the theories pertaining to the world population. A population is the number of organisms of a same species that live in a particular geographic area at the same time with the capability of interbreeding. This is the definition as per biological terms. Simply, you can tell population as the number of living things that exist together in a same place. The statistical study of the human population is the field of demography. It is the social science that entails the study of human population and make predictions about how a population will change. This field of study encompasses the study of the size, structure, and the distribution of these populations and the spatial or the temporal changes in them in response to birth, migration, aging, and death. Now, what is a population growth? A population growth can be defined as change in the size of population over a period of time. This change in the population can be either positive or negative. The population change depends on the rate of the natural increase and the net migration. Here, the natural increase refers to the difference between the fertility rate and the mortality rate, whereas the net migration refers to the difference between the in-migration and the out-migration. Thus, there are three major components that decides the growth of population. That is the birth rate, the death rate, and the migration. The birth rate refers to the number of or the ratio of the live births per thousand persons in a year. The death rate is the ratio of the deaths per thousand persons in a year. And the migration is the movement of people from one place to another. Now, let's find the difference between the population distribution and density. The population distribution is the way in which the people are spread or arranged across a given area. Hence, it is the pattern where the people live in. At the same time, density is the measurement of number of people in an area. It is the average number calculated by dividing the number of people by the total area. The density is expressed as number of people per square kilometer. Now let's look into the major determinant factors that decide the population growth and density of various regions. It is the population distribution and density which are often used as a simple relative measure of how an organism responds to a local condition. If the conditions are not good for a species, obviously they face or that region face low population. The organism might have died or moved out of that sampled area. If the conditions are good, those regions experiences very high population where the organism will be reproducing or immigrated to that area. Hence, there are three major determinants that decides the population distribution as well as density of a region. These are the physical factors, the socio-economic cultural factors, and nowadays the political factors too. Among the physical factors, the relief and the landforms play an important role in deciding the population of a region. Lowland plains, flat river valleys and deltas, and volcanic areas with fertile soils tend to always have high population. The mountainous areas, at the same time, with steep slope and poor quality soil, tend to have lower population. If you take the case of weather and climate, the temperate areas which experience few extremes of weather and climate tend to be more attracted than areas which experience extreme climatic condition. Areas which are very dry or cold or wet tend to have sparse population, whereas areas which have a moderate climate with evenly distributed rainfall and temperature or with monsoon type of climate generally will be having denser population. Areas which have rich fertile soil allowing a successful agricultural trend always tend to have higher population than areas which have poor quality soils. The good quality soil may be found in low-lying areas, in volcanic areas, generally with high humus content, and such areas experiences very high and denser population throughout the world. Water supply is essential for our human survival and the development, and because of this, areas that provide sufficient water supply tend to have denser population than areas which are dry or suffer from regular drought. You might have seen from our history itself, most of the world population or the civilization began from the river valleys as a result of the provision of good availability of water and soil. Some types of vegetation also make the development of settlement more likely. Take the case of grasslands. Areas with particularly dense rainforest or with coniferous forest or the areas with little vegetation tend to have sparse population. Areas with high natural resources like oil, minerals always tend to attract higher population densities than areas which do not. It is important to remember that the natural resources may be found in otherwise harsh environments and that they may have traded or exported in areas other than where they are extracted. And apart from all this, the natural threats also decides the distribution and the density of a population. These type of threats may affect the population density as the people may try to avoid areas where there are threats of the pest, animals, maybe diseases or some volcanic eruptions or areas with earthquakes as they are particularly at risk and hence attract lower population. Now let's look into the human factors. Among the human factors, the socio-economic cultural factors play a very important role in the distribution and density of population in an area. Areas with well-developed farming of crops or animals are often tend to have densely populated than areas with less agriculture. In terms of industrialization and urbanization, those areas which have high manufacturing and high urbanization has developed to be a densely populated regions. It is worth noting that even in the old industrial areas, in which manufacturing has declined or even closed, the population densities remain high as a result of high urbanization already achieved in such areas. Accessibility plays a very important role in today's population distribution. Areas with well developed transportation infrastructure and links through road, rail, shipping, or air are likely to be more densely populated than areas which are poorly connected. The religious factors also play an important role. You can find some of the cities that are highly populated in as a result of its cultural and religious experiences. Take the case of Vatican City, which is one of the highest populous density region of the world. Now, take the case of political factors. In some areas, the government policy have a significant impact upon the distribution and the density of population. This can occur if the government decided to open up previously underdeveloped areas. If the government decides not to invest in an area, it may also lose large number of people, leading to reduced population. Wars and conflict can also lead to significant movement of population, and a simultaneous decrease in the density in some areas occur as a result of internal conflicts and wars going on in those areas, while it increases the population of another area where these people are taking under as refugees. Now let's look into the world population current trends and patterns. The current world population as of June 2021 as per Worldometer is 7.79 billion. It is expected that this population will reach around 8 billion in the year 2023 according to the United Nations, and is expected to reach 9 billion in the year 2037. Take the case of the top largest countries in terms of its population. China accounts for 1.44 billion population as of June 2021. China is being followed by India around 1.39 billion population. These two countries together account for around 2.8 billion population among the total 7.9 billion population of the world. USA ranks third in the total population with 0.3 billion, followed by Indonesia with 0.27 billion and Pakistan with 0.22 billion population. As of 2020, we have reached 7.9 billion population. And before that, if you look into the milestones of the population, you can find that the population has reached 1 billion only by 1800 and currently 6 billion in the year 1999 October 12, and it reached 7 billion on October 31st 2011. Let's look into the milestones what achieved in our population. At the dawn of agriculture, about 8000 BC, the population of the world was approximately 5 million only. Over the 8000 years, that is, while you reach up to the period of first AD, it grew to 200 million, with a growth rate of under 0.05% per year. A tremendous change occurred in the population growth with the advent of Industrial Revolution, whereas it had taken all of the human history until around 1800 for the world population to reach 1 billion. With the advancement of industrial revolution, thereafter the population started growing at a rapid pace. The second billion of population was achieved within 130 years in the year 1930. It has grown to third billion within another 13 years in the year 1960, and the population has reached to fourth billion in the year 1974 within a short span of 15 years. And the fifth billion was reached only in 13 years, and it reached in the year 1987. And during the 20th century alone, it should be noted that the population in the world has grown from 1.65 billion to 6 billion. Now, if you look in the growth rate of the population, currently the world population is growing at a rate of around 1.05% per year. It was earlier 1.08% in 2019 and 1.1% in the year 2018. The current average population increase is estimated to be around 81 million people per year. The annual growth rate of the population was at its high peak in the late 1960s, where it was more than around 2%. And this time, we compare and term it as the period of population explosion. The world population will therefore continue to grow in 21st century, but at a slower rate what happened in the 1960s. It has doubled, that is in 14 years from 1959 to 1999. Now it is estimated that it will take another nearly 40 years to increase to another 50% to become 9 billion by 2037. Now, if you look into the distribution of the world population continent-wise, Asia, obviously, with India and China, accounts for the largest share of population continent-wise. The continent consists of 4.64 billion population with a world share of 59.5%. Africa is in its second position, having 1.3 billion population with a share of 17.2% of the world population. Africa is followed by Europe, North America, South America, and Australia. Antarctica doesn't have any share in its world population. If you take the case of the population country-wise, Monaco is the highest densely populated country in the world with 26,150.3 persons residing in a square kilometer. Monaco is followed by the Macau region of China with 21,419.6 persons per square kilometer, Singapore with 8,291.9 persons per square kilometer, China's Hong Kong province with 7,082.1 person per square kilometer, and the Gibraltar with 3,370.1 persons living in a square kilometer. If you take the case of the continent-wise, Asia have a density of 150 person per square kilometer, Africa with a density of 45 person per square kilometer, and Europe with 34, North America with 28, South America with 25, and Australia region with 5 persons per square kilometer. And now let's look into some of the important theories and models that pertain to the growth of population. And one of the most important one is the demographic transition theory. This demographic transition theory studies the relationship between the economic development and the population growth. The theory discusses about changes in the birth rate and the death rate, and consequently the growth rate of population in accordance with the process of population growth and development. It is used to describe and predict the population future of any area. The term demographic transition was first used by Warren Thompson in the year 1929 and later on by Frank Norstein in 1945. The term refers to a historical process of change which accounts for the trend in the births, death, and population growth that occurred in today's industrialized society, especially those of European societies. This process of demographic change began for most part of the world in the later part of 18th century. It should be also noted that the demographic transition should not be regarded as a law of population growth, but as a generalized description of the evolutionary process of world population. In simple terms, it is a theory which attempts to specify general laws by which the human population change in size and structure during industrialization. It is frequently accepted as a useful tool in describing the demographic history of a country. The theory postulates a particular pattern of demographic change from high fertility and high mortality to a low fertility and low mortality when the society progressed from a largely rural, agrarian and illiterate part to a dominant urban, industrial, literate and modern society. Hence, the theory is typically viewed as a three-stage process. The first one is that there is a decline in the mortality rate, and this decline in the mortality rate comes before the decline in the fertility. In the second process, the fertility also declines to match along with the mortality. And in the third process is that the socio-economic transformation of the society also takes place simultaneously along with this demographic transformation. The demographic transition theory is characterized by three major stages along with a pre-transitional stage. In the pre-transitional stage, it is highly fluctuating birth and death rate with little population growth. Whereas the stage 2 witness high birth rate and declining death rate with rapid population growth. In the stage 3, there is low birth and death rate with a slow population growth, followed by the later developed stage 4, where the birth and the death rates both decline appreciably, leading to zero population growth. Some scholars like Haggart in the year 1975 has also divided these into 4 or 5 stages. Now let's look into the pre-transitional stage. In the pre-transitional stage, the country is at a low level of economic development. In this stage, the fertility is over 35 per thousand and is almost stable. The mortality is also very high during this stage, where it is approximately 35 per thousand. But the behavior of mortality is highly erratic due to diseases and lack of hygiene. This stage is also termed as pre-industrial or a pre-modern stage. About 200 years ago, all the countries of the world were lying at this stage. In this stage, the births were very high because more children is needed to work in an agrarian society as per the societal norms. The death rate was also very high, and both the crude birth rate and the crude death rate were somewhat stable, and this meant a slow growth of population during the time. There were occasional epidemics that happened during this time that could dramatically increase the crude death rate, and this is being represented as waves in the pre-transition stage. Let's look into some of the key features of the pre-transitional stage. The pre-transitional stage witnessed a population of expanding at the bottom. It was highly stable population with high birth rate along with high infant mortality and death rate, leading to lower life expectancy. Much of the population were young and the older population were fewer in this stage. The society was highly dominated by religious beliefs and hence they have high birth rate. And the economy was very stagnant at this period. Now let's look into the stage 2. This is the stage of high birth rate and the low death rate. In this stage, the birth rate was high, but the death rate was very low. The death rate has dropped due to the improvement in the sanitation and in the medical field, and it dropped to over 15 per thousand. Out of tradition and practice, the birth rate still remained high to over 30 per thousand. The dropping death rate, but the stable birth rate in the beginning of stage 2 was being termed as the early expanding stage. And the early expanding stage has contributed to skyrocketing population growth. Over time, with the advances in the birth control, the crude birth rate was reduced and the population still was growing with a diminishing rate. And this stage is being termed as late expanding stage. Most of the developed countries of the world were passing through this stage. Many less developed countries are currently in the stage 2 of the first part of the model, like that of Kenya. Now let's look into the key features of stage 2. In the stage 2, the population pyramid was rapidly expanding. This very rapid increase in the population led to the population explosion throughout the world. There was a rapid decline in the death rate, but the death, however, remains very low below the birth rate. At the same time, the fertility rate remains very high, leading to high birth rate. And this has resulted in high rate of natural increase of population. The advancement in the field of medicine has declined the infant mortality rate. As a result, now much of the society was dominated by young people. Now let's look into the third stage. The third stage of declining birth rate and the low death rate. In the third stage, a declining birth and the low death rate led to the population of low growth. Along with the economic development of the country, the structural changes in the economy began to take place. A large population began to reside in urban areas. People start considering large families as a liability. Consequently, the birth rate started falling at a rapid rate. The death rate continues to be low. The growth rate of the population thus declined. Currently, our country, India, is passing through this stage of demographic transition. The notable features of this stage are the population pyramid is almost stationary. The population growth started slowing down. The birth rate started declining rapidly, along with decline in the fertility rate. The death rate also were declining slowly. As a result, the birth rate started approaching along with the death rate. There was high life expectancy as a result of increase in the field of medicine and science. And now there is an increasing number of older population than that of the younger population. Now let's look into the stage 4. In the fourth stage, a low birth rate and a low death rate led to the population stabilization. This means that the crude birth rate and the crude death rate both were leveled off at a very low rate. The mortality is also so slow and stable, and the fertility is also low, but it was a little bit fluctuating. In this stage, the standard of living of the people becomes very high as a result of rapid economic development. The quality of life was given more priority than the size of the family. The notable features of this stage is that the population pyramid started getting contracted. The population increase was either slow or stable. There was only low birth rate and low death rate. The life expectancy remained very high. The birth rate is approximately as same like that of death rate. The fertility rate also comes to below 2. And the population was highly composed with much older than the younger population. Thus, both the fertility and the mortality declined considerably in the last stage. The population is either stable or grows slowly, and it becomes much urbanized, literate, and has high technical know-how and deliberately controls the size of the family. This shows that human beings are extremely flexible and are able to adjust their fertility. In the present day, many countries around the world are at different stages of this demographic transition. Now let's critically evaluate the theory. Although the theory of demographic transition has been appreciated widely by the demographers, it has been criticized under many grounds. The demographic transition stages are not always sequenced in order. Let's look into some of the major points of criticism against this theory. Firstly, this theory is mainly based on empirical observations or the experience of many European and developed countries like America and Australia. It is neither predictive nor its stages are segmental and inevitable. Thirdly, the role of man's technical innovations cannot be underrated, particularly in the field of medicines, which can arrest the rate of mortality. Also, they have not provided the stage of agricultural revolution's role in this theory. The model does not predict that whether all the countries will reach in the stage 3. Also, they were not able to provide a time frame for a country to move from one stage to another stage. Although an understanding of this model will help us to a better understanding of the population policies and changes in the developed and less developed countries around the world. Now, you can find similar models with modified versions including 4 or even 5 stages that I have mentioned about Haggett in the year 1975. Now, let's look into the Malthusian theory of population. Thomas Robert Malthus was the key figure to analyze the population statistics. His formulation on population was a landmark in the history of population theory. Malthus generalized the relation between the population factors and the social change. In the year 1798, Malthus gave a theory on population. In his essay on population, he was mainly directed against the optimistic or the utopianism view of the then world. The title of the essay was An Essay on the Principle of Population as it affects the future improvement of society, with remarks on the specifications of Mr. Godwin, N. Clandover, and others. This work was published anonymously with empirical evidences. Malthus' theory made a landmark in the population studies, and the population views were thereafter classified as pre-Malthusian, Malthusian, anti-Malthusian, and neo-Malthusian. Malthus published his second edition in the year 1803 and produced several additional editions until 6th in 1826 after collecting the relevant statistical data from North America. The first edition of the essay began with two postulates. One is the food is necessary for the existence of our life. And second one, the passion between the sexes is necessary and it will remain as nearly as the present state. If we accept these two laws, Malthus argued that the power of population is definitely greater than the power of the earth to produce subsistence for man. For that, Malthus framed two basic propositions for explaining his theory. If the population went unchecked, it would increase in a geometric ratio as like 1, 2, 4, 16, 32 and so on. However, the subsistence increase only in arithmetic ratio like 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. That means within the 2 centuries, that is 200 years, the population will be 256 times and the food supply or the agriculture products remain only 9 times. He also argued that the population tend to double itself in every 25 years. According to Malthus, the widening gap between the population and the food supply will increase the pressure over the subsistence, and this results the society to get into two divisions: the have or the rich and the have-nots or the poor. This societal division leads to capitalistic setup. The capitalistic society will result the rich becoming more richer and the poor becoming more poorer. Malthus has recognized that powerful checks can obstruct the growth of population, and he classified these checks under two titles. One is the preventive check and other one is the positive checks. Malthus included moral restraints and vice as the voluntary checks. He described moral restraints as subsistence, either by delayed marriage or without marriage, or from marrying either delayed or permanently. And the vice was described by prevention of birth or birth control or homosexuality. The other one was the positive checks. The positive checks were here referred as the general factors which tend to shorten our human life. Malthus classified the positive checks as exclusive misery and avoidable misery. Here, the exclusive misery includes the natural causes such as earthquake or a flood or a tsunami or any disaster like that. The avoidable misery is included as the war or the famine or a disease that the humans can avoid. Now let's critically evaluate Malthusian theory. The Malthus contribution were considered as not original, although he put his ideas in a larger framework and examined the interrelation between the population growth and the socio-economic developments. Some of his earlier critics was about his personal life. The Malthus views has been challenged in many or other ways. He was overemphasizing the positive checks and did not visualize the role of preventive checks like contraceptives and family planning measures. The neo-Malthusianists argued for the adoption of birth control within the marriage. Human interventions in the field of birth control, health and nutrition and agriculture have helped to a greater extent to strike a balance between the human reproduction and food supply. And many others were of the view that the validity of his ratio has been questioned. It was argued that the population has rarely grown in a geometric proportion and the means of production have rarely multiplied in arithmetic progression. Population growth is not always geometric series. Based on the historical data, the population is not getting doubled in every 25 years. Several others have also criticized Malthus for ignoring the role of changing technology and the consequent transformation in the socio-economic setup of the society. Malthus has not considered agricultural revolution in his theory. Even though all these critics, Malthus' concept play a vital role in the demographic studies of the world. I hope you have enjoyed today's session. Post your queries and comments in the suggestion box or through the Edmodo. I wish all my viewers a great day ahead. Thank you.